Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is this thing on? Is this thing on? Mic check? Okay. Hello everyone. Welcome to the third annual Double EcoCon 2023. I thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come out here with us and have some wonderful Masonic education. That was a very good presentation, excellent, and there's definitely more to come. So hello brethren of the Valley of Chicago and visiting friends. I'm Brother Justus Fisher, a member of Barrington Lodge number 522 in Barrington, Illinois, assistant editor of the Illinois Lodge of Research, and a proud member of this lovely valley here. Thank you so much for Brother Scott Duball for the lovely introduction. I want to say that I'm very humbled to have been selected to carry on the legacy of the third annual Double EagleCon. For many years, I have been fascinated with the topic of Freemasonry. I enjoy collecting antique books and relics of the craft. Another passion of mine is Masonic research, and I like to write about my findings. A little disclaimer here, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm merely a curious brother and a humble student of ancient mysteries. It is my sincerest aspiration to contribute a legacy for future generations of wisdom seekers. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of my own and are not necessarily a reflection of any Masonic group. What I'm going to do here is present my lecture in 3 sections. After each section, I would encourage the audience to ask me any questions or provide some commentary. Section 1, this will be a very brief outline and summary of the history of the Scottish Rite, chronicling its inception in France and following the Rite's journey to America. Section 2, this will be a brief yet insightful history of the origins of the Scottish Rite in Chicago. Section 3, this section will discuss the history and formation of the Order of the Builders, a Masonic youth group that members of this valley initially formed to help the inner city youth of Chicago. It was a labor of love to conduct the research needed to procure this presentation. It took many hours in our library here in this valley, as well as personal materials acquired for at-home research and visiting some of our older members to obtain first-hand accounts and documents. I want to thank the following brethren for their assistance and guidance. Brothers Carl Peterson, the librarian here at the Valley, Gary Behringer, former Grand Master of Order of the Builders, Hilton Kaufman, the editor of Lodge of Research, and illustrious brothers Arturo de Hoyos and S. Brent Morris. And to our posthumous brethren whose writing proved to be valuable informational resources, George Warvell and Alphonse Surza. Okay, let's begin. Let's get that first slide up here. Section 1, Écossaise Freemasonry in the Western Hemisphere. Our story begins in Paris, France, around 1758, where the birth of Écossais, or Scottish Rite, Masonry takes place. August 27, 1761, the French Grand Lodge at Paris supposedly birthed a body of high degrees under the auspices of the Grand and Sovereign Lodge of St. John of Jerusalem. A patent was issued to Etienne Stephen Morin under the counsel of the emperors of the East and West Sovereign Écossaise Mother Lodge. Say that 3 times fast. The intention was for Morin to promote the Hawks grades of Masonry in the New World, or high grade. However, it is more probable that his capacity was limited to only the first 3 symbolic degrees. This patent authorized Morin to set up the Scottish Rite to establish perfect and sublime Masonry in all parts of the world. So by these slides, you're going to see an interesting journey that this Écossaise Masonry takes throughout the New World. It's pretty interesting, actually. That's why I decided to explain this backstory to further explain the history of the Valley of Chicago, because they're kind of intertwined, the stories. Before receiving his patent, Stephen Morin was made a Freemason in Bordeaux, France, at Loge la Française. Sorry, I don't speak French. The exact year is unknown. However, it is speculated by some researchers to be around 1740 to 1744. Shortly after that, Morin would gravitate toward the Écossaise degrees. He will become a master of Lodge Parfait Harmonie in 1744, and this is an early wax seal of this lodge, but from 1746, courtesy of Joseph Wages. Morin traveled to the West Indies between 1750 to 1752. In 1753, he started an Ecossais chapter at Port de Paix in San Domingo. However, contention arose between Morin and his mother lodge, Lodge La Française in Bordeaux. There were accusations from this lodge that Morin exceeded his Masonic authority. The ordeal resulted in this lodge sending a deputy and superior to Morin to oversee and supersede Morin's actions. Morin would return to France around 1759 to 1760, most likely to mend broken relationships. However, instead of traveling to Bordeaux, he decided to go directly to the Ecossais body in Paris. Yielding successful results there, he was granted a patent from the Grand East of Paris on August 27, 1761, giving him Masonic authorities. The following transcription is from a copy of Morin's patent. I'm not going to read it all because of time, but I'll just read some cool parts here. We have, with general consent, constituted and instituted him, and by these presents do institute, constitute, and give full and entire power to the said Morin, whose signature is set in the margin hereof, to form and establish a lodge, to receive and multiply the royal order of free and accepted Masons in all degrees, perfect and sublime, to take care that the laws, statutes, and regulations of the Grand and Sovereign Lodge, both general and particular, be well kept and observed, and never to admit any but true and lawful brothers to the sublime Masonry. There's a lot of charter language, and some stuff is like really like abbreviated, and there's like cipher language in here, which I'm not really privy to at this time. But at the end of this patent, it says, "We therefore desire all brothers in general to give the said Morin all the assistance and help that may be in their power, requiring him to do the same toward all the brothers that are members of his lodge, and those whom he hath admitted and constituted, or may hereafter admit and constitute to the sublime degrees of the highest perfection, which we give him full and entire power to multiply and create deputy inspectors in all places where the sublime degrees are not established, knowing him well, his great knowledge and capacity and testimony whereof." In 1761, Morin left with his patent, and while at sea, the British captured his ship and took him to London. Although the British granted liberty, Morin was detained in Great Britain for 14 months. According to Morin's records, he could travel to various Masonic lodges there. Morin visited Scotland Masonically for 3 months. During this time, Morin met Washington Shirley. He was the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England, the Moderns. If you don't know the backstory, there's the Antients and the Moderns and the whole Grand Lodge thing. But anyway, that's a whole nother lecture. He was the 5th Earl of Farrells who endorsed Morin's Ecossais patent. Although other Freemasons often disputed this patent, he vigorously defended his Masonic authority. In 1763, Stephen Morin arrived in San Domingo with his patent, and shortly after his arrival there, he received a bulky packet with wax seals by mail from Bordeaux. This packet will contain the secret constitutions of 1761 and the constitutions and regulations of 1762, which appears to have been drafted by the lodge in Bordeaux after his departure in 1761. Morin was steadily at work to develop his Rite of Perfection, the name for his first 14 degrees of the Order of the Royal Secret. His first act was to appoint a man named Henry Andrew Franken as the Deputy Inspector General of all the superior degrees of free and accepted Masons in the West Indies. Eventually, Morin would appoint other Deputy Inspector Generals while visiting other Masonic lodges on the island. On October 26, 1764, he established the Parfait Harmonie Lodge in Port-au-Prince, where he declared himself the Perpetual Master. However, more contention arose when the Masonic authorities in Paris were notified of Morin's overzealous actions. The result was Morin's status of inspector was annulled by the lodge in Paris, and he was eventually replaced by a brother named Martin to take his place. However, the course of action did not deter Morin from continuing his Masonic activities, which he pursued until his death on November 17, 1771. Henry Andrew Franken was most likely born in Holland or one of the Dutch colonies in 1720. In 1757, he became a widower and moved to Jamaica. Around the period between 1758 to 1763, Franklin met Etienne Morin when Morin was passing through Jamaica. While en route to Santo Domingo, Morin communicated the 4th through 14th degrees of the Order of the Royal Secret. Although the origin of Henry Franklin's early Masonic affiliation is unknown, in 1765 his association with Stephen Morin resulted in Morin appointing him a Deputy Grand Inspector. In August 1767, Franklin was given a special leave of absence from his official government duties as a Dutch and English translator and Sergeant of the Court of Vice Admiralty by the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. Upon arriving in New York for Masonic business, he formed the Ineffable Lodge of Perfection in Albany. It lasted 7 years until December 5th, 1774, and was later revived in 1820. Considering Franklin's professional background as a translator, it was second nature for him to transcribe and translate various ritual manuscripts of the Order of the Royal Secret. Henry Andrew Franklin put down his working tools on May 20, 1795, and was survived by his son, daughter, and grandchild. He was buried on May 24 in Kingston Parish Churchyard. The 25 degrees of his Masonic Rite were divided into 7 classes, with the crafted degrees acknowledged in this system, but they had yet to be worked at the time. These degrees appear in Henry Franklin's 1783 manuscript as follows. So the degrees are breaking down into different classes, so I'll just briefly run through them. First class, 1 to 3, entered apprentice, fellow craft master. Second class, 4th degree to 7, secret master, perfect master by curiosity or intimate secretary, provost and judge or Irish master, intendant of the buildings or master in Israel. I gotta love these Scottish Rite degree names. I mean, they're just really cool. Third class, 9th degree to 11, chapter of master elected of 9, illustrious elected of 15, a chapter called Sublime Knights elected. Fourth class, 12th degree through 14, Grandmaster Architect, Royal Arch, Perfection, or the Ultimate of Symbolic Masonry. Fifth class, 15 through 18, Knights of the East or Sword, Grand Council of the Illustrious and Most Valiant Princes of Jerusalem, Knight of the East and West, Knights of the White Eagle or Pelican, known by the name of Perfect Mason or Knight of the Rose Cross. Sixth class, 19 through 22, Sublime Scotch Masonry, Venerable Grand Master of all Symbolic Lodges, or Master ad Vitam, Prussian Knight or Noahite, also known as the Masonic Key, Knight of the Royal Axe or the Grand Patriarchs by the name of Princes of Lebanon, 7th class, 23 to 25, the Key of Masonry, Chapter of the Grand Inspector of Lodges or Elected Knights of Kadash, the Royal Secret or Knights of St. Andrew, and the Faithful Guardians of the Sacred Treasure. Some of these degrees had 2 or 3 names depending on where they were worked at the time. So it's pretty cool to have like all the names there. But yeah. So in 1767, when Franklin brought these high degrees to be conferred in Albany and New York City, he was able to transcribe several copies, some of which are still in existence today. There's 4 copies left in the world. The Scottish Rite Northern Masonic Jurisdiction in Lexington, Massachusetts has a copy in their library, and here's a photo that I found of one of their existing copies. These documents are referred to as the Franklin manuscripts. In 1768, Franklin appointed Moses Michael Hayes, a Deputy Inspector General of the Order in the West Indies and North America, to ensure the Order's survival. Hayes would eventually appoint other deputies until the early 1800s. In 1801, the Supreme Council of 33rd absorbed these degrees into what is now known since 1804 as the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the establishment of the Supreme Council in the United States. Colonel John Mitchell, as you can see here, and Reverend Frederick Dalcho. Shout out to Travis Simpkins, he did the illustrations for this, he's a very talented artist. John Mitchell and Frederick Dalcho were high-ranking officers in the Order of the Royal Secret. This Masonic system dated to the 1760s, according to the constitutions of 1786. Authorization was granted for 2 supreme councils in the United States, which mandated that no Scottish Rite Mason could obtain authority in a country where a supreme council existed without obtaining permission from that said council. Since the only supreme council in the United States was in Charleston, South Carolina, it possessed seniority to govern over its jurisdiction. This council was waiting for the appropriate time to set up another supreme council and divide its territory within the United States. However, that moment will finally come as a result of the direct action from Antoine Bedard, when in August 1806 in New York City, he started a sublime grand consistory of 30 to 32nd degree. Bedard received his degrees in the French West India Islands under the authority of the Supreme Council in Charleston, with Alexander Francois Auguste de Gracie Tilly as Grand Commander. Wow, say that 3 times fast. However, Masonic authority was not extended outside of the islands, so when Bedard put on the Scottish Rite degrees in New York, it was irregular and unconstitutional. So here is an illustration of de Gracie Tilly, very instrumental in the Scottish Rite in the United States. However, this information was unknown to the 5 candidates these degrees were conferred upon. One of the participants was J.J. Gorgas, who would eventually become a legendary figure in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. So essentially, what was happening is people are starting to get wind of the Scottish Rite in New York, and they're willing to pay a lot of money to get these Scottish Rite degrees. However, the people who are giving these degrees, they don't have the proper authority to do so. So essentially, the 5 brethren, including Gorgas, paid $46 to receive the degrees, totaling $230 that went directly to Antoine Bedard's pocket. And essentially, you know, this is a long time ago. I mean, we don't even have an inflation calculator that goes back this far. So, I mean, $46 back then was a lot of money. And quite frankly, these men felt cheated once they found out that they didn't have a regular patent, right? This would eventually lead to the Supreme Council in Charleston, South Carolina, to establish another Supreme Council in the United States. The Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite was founded in Charleston, South Carolina on May 31st, 1801, and it inherited all the degrees of Warren's Order of the Royal Secret. Colonel Mitchell and Reverend Doucho spearheaded the Supreme Council in Charleston. In the 1802 Manifesto, or also known as the Circular throughout the 2 hemispheres, this document detailed the first official account of the Scottish Rite, which was touted as a superior system of 33 degrees, comprising Etienne Morin's 25-degree system, with an additional 7 degrees and 1 honorary degree, totaling 33. Craft Masonry has temples or lodges. The Scottish Rite has valleys. These valleys are named after the cities in which they are located, example, Valley of Chicago. Moreover, they comprise 4 subgroups or bodies that administer a separate set of degrees within the Scottish Rite. Each body has its progressive lineup of officers. The northern and southern jurisdiction have some differences in degree names and structure of the bodies. For example, the Scottish Rite in the southern jurisdiction is as follows. Laws of Perfection is responsible for the 4th and 14th, a chapter of Rose Croix, 15th through 18th, Council of Kadosh, 19 through 30, and a Consistory of Masters of the Royal Secret, 31st through 32nd. The symbol of the Scottish Rite is the double-headed eagle, inherited from the Order of the Royal Secret. Inspiration for this draws from earlier alchemical symbology and esotericists sometimes equated with the Philosopher's Stone. The motto of the 32nd degree is Spes mea in Dio est, my hope is in God. And the slogan for the 33rd degree is Dios memque jus, God in my right. Members of the Scottish Rite meet twice a year during degree conferrals called reunions in the spring and fall seasons. However, many valleys have the occasional degree or social event anytime between these 2 reunions. That's an illustration of Gorgas, who was a very instrumental character in the Scottish Rite. Once he found out that he got gypped out of his money, he decided that he wanted to become regular and do it the right way. So this didn't deter him from his Masonic journey. He continued to keep on, and this man is also known as the conservator of the Rite. During the period of anti-Masonic fervor in the United States, he kept the Scottish Rite going. Okay. All right. That leads me to another infamous character of the Scottish Rite's history, Joseph Surnow. So Joseph Surnow was born in 1763 and died around 1840 to 1845. He was a French charter master of La Temple de Virtus Theologus, number 103, which was a Pennsylvania lodge working in Havana, Cuba. After the slave revolt in Haiti in 1802, Surnow fled to Cuba, where he would remain until being exiled from the country in 1806. After he departed from the island, Surnow moved to New York City with his family in 1807. It was during this time that Surnow would constitute, without authority, a sovereign grand consistory of sublime princes of the royal secret. And it would eventually become the grand consistory of supreme chiefs of exalted masonry in October that same year. The rebrand came after Joseph Surnow discovered that the Order of the Royal Secret got absorbed into a newly formed Scottish Rite in Charleston, with the Royal Secret's 25th degree becoming the Scottish Rite's 32nd. Before this, Surnow was made a Deputy Grand Inspector for the northern part of Cuba, under the auspices of the Order of the Royal Secret, to confer the 4th through the 24th degree on lodge officers, and the 25th degree once a year. In 1810, he affiliated with Washington Lodge number 21 in New York. So as you can see here by the research, his capacity to administer the Scottish Rite degrees were limited, very limited. He was kind of like, for lack of a better term, like a DDGM of the Scottish Rite in his area in Cuba that he was assigned to. He didn't have authority to be the Grand Poobah, right? Surnow was a talented individual and a passionate Freemason. However, his creation of the Scottish Rite Supreme Council violated the constitutions of 1786, which were the founding law of the Scottish Rite. Surnow abused his patent as a deputy inspector simply because he acted outside his limited jurisdiction in Cuba and erected his Supreme Council in opposition to the Grand Constitution of 1786. Surnow simply refused to correct his mistakes. In 1813, the general organization of Freemasonry's high degrees in the United States needed to be fixed by the Supreme Council in Charleston. Many noteworthy Masons with limited authority over different and random degrees had established competing high degree bodies in New York. These bodies mainly belonged to three groups with minimal opinions on whether they held allegiance or had received their authority. The confusion in the temple had to be reconciled by Masonic leaders of each competing Scottish Rite Masonic body. In the summer of 1813, Emmanuel de la Mata, the Treasurer General of the Supreme Council at Charleston, ended up on a leisurely trip concerning his health and well-being in New York. He could also observe the Masonic fiasco firsthand while attending to his personal matters. To find out what solutions may have existed, de la Mata approached each of these rival Masonic bodies, hoping to establish its credibility. He first encountered the Masonic body led by Bedard and encountered Tompkins and Riker. Tompkins was the governor of New York, and Riker was the district attorney of New York City. So right here is a clear indicator that the Scottish Rite is starting to gain momentum and gain traction. And many noteworthy members are starting to join, members who have political influence, some level of authority, power, etc. So it's a little tricky right now because people who are joining, they do have legal powers and they do have connections and they do have finances, and it's definitely legal battles going on because of this. This Masonic group named itself the Sublime Grand Consistory. Another group composed of personal and political rivals of the Sublime Grand Consistory, headed by Joseph Surnow, called itself the Grand Consistory for the United States of America. This second Masonic group claimed among its ranks DeWitt Clinton, the Lieutenant Governor who would eventually become the Governor of New York. Clinton and the Grand Master of Freemasonry in New York, coincidentally, had worked alongside Simpson, the Grand Treasurer, and Tompkins, who had served as the Grand Secretary. The third Scottish Rite group, led by Abraham Jacobs, had formed the Sublime Grand Lodge of Perfection, and Council of Princes of Jerusalem. Cerno had already condemned both parties as irregular. However, de la Mata reasoned that these conditions were completely unacceptable. He wrote to the Sovereign Grand Commander Mitchell and the Lieutenant Grand Commander Dalcho in Charleston. The Supreme Council gave de la Mata the authority to resolve the situation according to his best judgment. Upon calling on each Masonic body to explain its actions, he was met with hesitance by the Cerno group, who did not cooperate in rectifying the situation. Upon his investigations, de la Mata declared not only was the Cerno Scottish Rite group irregular, but also that the Jacob Scottish Rite group was without any authority and proper warrants to establish its organizations. Complying with all requests by de la Mata, the Antoine Bedard Scottish Rite group was founded to be the only Masonic body worthy of recognition by the Supreme Council. August 5th, 1813, under the auspices of the Supreme Council in Charleston, South Carolina, de la Mata issued the proclamation and a charter that granted legitimacy to the Bedard Scottish Rite group, renaming it Grand and Supreme Council of the Most Puissant Sovereigns, Grand Inspectors General of the 33rd degree for the Northern District and jurisdiction of the United States of America. So that's the beginning of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, essentially. Albert Pike. Born in 1809, Albert Pike became a member of the Freemasons in 1850. After that, he will become a member of the York Rite and Scottish Rite, receiving the 32nd degree in 1853. Between 1854 and 1855, Albert Pike was appointed to a committee by the Supreme Council to revise the Scottish Rite ritual, considering that the predecessor rite of the Royal Secret lacked the proper substance in the degrees. So essentially, when these degrees were initially being communicated by Morin or Franken, the degrees weren't elaborate as they are now. There were kind of sketches or skeletons of degrees with maybe some grips, signs, or passwords, and maybe some little lessons, but not nowhere near as elaborate as these degrees are today. It's really because of this man that we have the degrees that have such a rich and lush philosophy and intellectual discourse, right? Pike was a historian, poet, and scholar of Vedic literature. He was able to draw inspiration from a pool of profoundly deep wisdom. Albert Pike's contributions to the Scottish Rite are so significant that a few paragraphs about him will not suffice. Entire books have been written about this individual. To keep this lecture on topic, we shall leave this anecdote brief. Pike's ritual versions have been modified throughout the years, but remain somewhat intact in the Southern jurisdiction. Pike is most known for his book, Morals and Dogma. All right, sources of Pike's Scottish Rite rituals. Albert Gallatin Mackey, as seen here, born 1807, died 1881, was a prolific author, historian, and custodian of Masonic ritual. Historians believe that in 1825, Mackey likely introduced changes to the Scottish Rite ritual. The manuscripts transcribed by Pike in his ritual book, Masonic Formulas and Rituals, were not originally used to communicate the degrees to him in 1853. There is evidence of this by Pike's occasional commentaries, such as, quote, "My notes taken when I received this degree are," end quote. Example, MS page 87B. In such cases, Pike's notations differ from the actual ritual that he transcribed. Although most of Pike's Scottish Rite ritual manuscripts were borrowed from Mackey, it is still being assessed by Masonic historians where Mackey received them or where they are now, since they have vanished after he loaned them to others. Pike would take these rituals and add his interpretations, dubbing his revisions the Magnum Opus in 1857. For example, the 31st degree in the Magnum Opus was unlike its predecessor, as Pike's version contained monologues for the Saxon king Alfred, Socrates, Confucius, Meno, Zoroaster, and Moses. This anecdote is a small indicator of the extent of Pike's literary prowess. This is kind of a lot to get into, so I'll kind of breeze through it. The rituals of the Scottish Rite, as given to Pike, the 4th through the 33rd, are Secret Master, Perfect Master, Intimate Secretary, Provost and Judge, Intendant of the Building, Elect Knights of 9, Illustrious Elect of 15, Sublime Knights Elected, Grand Master Architect, Royal Arch, Perfection or Grand Elect, Perfect Masters, Knight of the Sword of the East, Princes of Jerusalem, Knight of the East and West, Sovereign Prince of Rose-Croix, And then there's also an alternate version of this as well called Sovereign Prince of Rose-Croix of Errata. 19th, Grand Pontiff, Grand Master of all Symbolic Lodges. 21, Noahide of Prussian Knight. 22, Knight of the Royal Axe or Prince of Libanus. 23, Chief of the Tabernacle. Prince of the Tabernacle, Knight of the Brazen Serpent, Prince of Mercy, Sovereign Commander of the Temple. This almost sounds like a Metallica album track listing or something like that. Sovereign Commander of the Temple, Grand Commander of the Temple, which is the alternate French version, and then another alternate version called Sovereign Commander of the Temple, Knight of the Sun, Grand Equisace of St. Andrew, Knight of Kadash, NEC plus Ultra, the alternate version, 31st degree Grand Inquiring Commander, 32nd Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret, 33rd Sovereign Grand Inspector General. All right, section 2, the establishment of the Scottish Rite in Chicago, Illinois. As a result of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, many documents about the records of the early appendant bodies were destroyed. To supplement this missing information, the Supreme Council of the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction records indicate that the Supreme Council tried to establish a body of the Scottish Rite in 1846. This effort came 6 years after the Second Grand Lodge of Illinois Reformation in 1840. This plan would not materialize until 1856 when Kilian Van Rensselaer conferred the Sublime Prince of the Royal Secret for the first time, with Charles R. Starkweather acting as Commander-in-Chief. Here's a photo of Charles Starkweather. On May 14, 1857, the Supreme Council granted charters to the various Scottish Rite bodies in Chicago, including Van Rensselaer, Grand Lodge of Perfection, Illinois Council of Princes of Jerusalem, Gorgas Chapter of Rose-Croix of Errata, and Occidental Sovereign Consistory in 1865. The entire membership of the Rite in the city, including active, honorary, and emeritus, totaled 82 members. After the Civil War, the United States interest in Freemasonry started to draw attention. A little note about Starkweather. Charles Robert Starkweather was born in New York and moved to Chicago in 1838, becoming a Freemason in Illinois and receiving the 4th to 14th Scottish Rite degrees in New York in 1844. Starkweather was one of the 5 men to form the first Scottish Rite body in Chicago, Illinois in 46. However, this group would remain inactive until 1856. It is during this time Starkweather would receive the 15th to 32nd degrees. 2 competing rites in Chicago. At the end of the Civil War, Freemasonry in all its branches had returned from a temporary decline in membership, as did the Scottish Rite throughout the country. Ironically, this process was due to rival Scottish Rite organizations in the North competing for members and declaring themselves exclusive as a jurisdiction in the northern states. Coordinate bodies of the 2 rival Scottish Rite factions in Chicago would extend to branches throughout Illinois. The Surnow Scottish Rite was the primary opponent to the Chicago bodies. Joseph Cernow's brand of Freemasonry was similar to the existing Rite, but inclined towards the philosophical and chivalric elements of the degrees. Ultimately, Cernow did not have the proper authority to exist as a primary source of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Eventually, he ceased operations due to the overwhelming pressure from the rival Supreme Council. Even though Cernow garnered a notable following of members in his Rite, the Scottish Rite in Illinois had traveled to Springfield, Waukegan, Yates City, DeKalb, Monmouth, and Princeton. However, the bodies in the smaller cities found it challenging to thrive due to the overwhelming popularity of the York Rite bodies. According to the Illinois Masonic historian George Warbell, in some cases, the Scottish Rite bodies were somehow oppressed by the Knight Templar commanderies, particularly in Springfield. However, to what extent is not explained by Warbell. Overall, it took much work for these Scottish Rite bodies in the smaller cities to adapt to the changes and stimulate membership growth. As a result, these consistories stopped operations or had to relocate in a merger. For example, Springfield, Monmouth, and Princeton organizations had ceased operations. The Waukegan bodies moved to Quincy, the DeKalb bodies to Freeport, and the Yates City bodies to Peoria. This endeavor proved to be successful as operations began to pick up momentum. On March 17, 1871, the deputy for Illinois issued an order calling a meeting on March 24, 1871, to consummate the final union of differing Scottish Rite groups. The first meeting was held January 27, 1871. A week later, the former Hayes Raymond bodies surrendered their charters, with a new set of officers being installed. Under the terms of the consolidation, any member who did not desire to continue under the new union was granted permission to demit. This was done because it was recognized that some members felt very strongly about the matter and opposed the union of the Scottish Rite bodies. As a result, many members did request demit. The Scottish Rite continued frequently holding weekly meetings and conferrals of the degrees to remedy the membership decline. The general policy of the two bodies also exhibited significant differences, and these differences became strongly accentuated after the merger of the parent Supreme Councils. 5 weeks after the Great Chicago Fire on November 16, 1871, the Supreme Council met in Boston to conduct business. A charter was granted for a new Scottish Rite body in Chicago, Illinois, under Oriental Consistory. The purpose of this charter was simply to confirm the agreement upon the original union of the two rivals, the Chicago Scottish Rite bodies, which took place on April 27, 1871. The first 10 years of the newly consolidated Rite in Chicago saw slow yet steady membership growth from 1880 to 1890. This growth accelerated rapidly, and from 1890 to 1900, it boasted the most significant membership total of any Scottish Rite body in the world. In Worville's History of the Consistory, he describes this period as, quote, the Oriental Consistory closes its first semi-centennial period strong in men and money, and possesses one of the finest buildings in the country devoted to Scottish Rite Masonry. It has no internal dissensions and is enjoying as never before the respect, esteem, and confidence of the ancient craft from which its members are chosen, end quote. So yeah, here's the Oriental Consistory magazine, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So the location of the consistory and its library. The unified Scottish Rite bodies were initially housed at the Masonic Temple on Halsted and West Randolph Streets in Chicago for some time. Shortly after completing the Masonic apartments in the American Express building, the Scottish Rite moved in and called this their home for many years. It was not until 1900 that the Rite would move again to Dearborn Street. In 1911, the Rite acquired the Medina Shriners Mosque located at the corner of Dearborn and Walden Streets and continued to grow until the Scottish Rite owned all of the adjoining properties. After more than a century at that location, the Rite decided to liquidate the properties by Dearborn, Walton, State, and Delaware Streets and build a state-of-the-art headquarters in the Chicago suburb of Bloomingdale, Illinois, which we're here now. The new building was completed in 2012. The current Scottish Rite Cathedral offers an advanced digitally controlled two-story theater, banquet hall, an entertainment lounge, and a well-furnished library and a professionally curated museum. The Valley of Chicago Library is a result of the consolidation of Masonic book collectors joining forces into a singular library. The St. Bernard Commandery of Knight Templars obtained the library of collector John O. Dickerson, which the Oriental Consistory would eventually acquire. After becoming a Master Mason, George Worville, a Chicago attorney and teacher, developed a massive Masonic library. So this is from the Scottish Rite magazine. Essentially, I scanned the page and I blew it up here and kind of edited a little bit so you could see it. But beautiful ornate building there for the library. So yeah, Worville obtained many books. However, his library would prove too extensive for his home. In 1890, Worville started the Acacia Club. This club was a social group for Master Masons located at 105 Ashland Avenue in Chicago. Worville and others donated a substantial portion of their libraries to the club. In 1895, the Acacia Club disbanded with its library placed in storage. The Oriental Consistory opted to take possession of the books and move them to the Scottish Rite quarters of the Masonic Temple at Randolph and State Street. This book collection was named the Library of Oriental Consistory. At the time, the library was considered one of the area's most extensive Masonic book collection. On July 1st, 1909, the Scottish Rite Library Committee held its first meeting. A suggestion was made to rename the library to the Masonic Library of Chicago and make the books available to every local Freemason. However, the initiative failed. In 1910, the library would relocate to the adjoining building next to the consistory on Dearborn Avenue. The property covered 30 feet of frontage by 125 feet of depth. The board of directors established this location as a permanent residence for the 5,000 plus books. In addition to being a library, it included a well-furnished reading space, restrooms, and a banquet hall for dining and educational lectures. On August 1st, 1909, the first issue of the Oriental Consistory was published. From the early days of the Scottish Rite in Chicago, news bulletins had been periodically posted for the benefit of the membership, but this was the first time a formal news periodical concerning the Rite was printed. A press committee was appointed to produce the magazine, and the membership was encouraged to send in news articles of interest. In 1915, the magazine was discontinued as a monthly periodical and replaced by a smaller weekly publication. A few years later, the magazine would make a comeback monthly. In 1924, the name was changed to the Chicago Scottish Rite magazine, which lasted for a handful of decades. The magazine is still presently in print under the Valley of Chicago moniker. All right, section 3, the Forgotten Builders from Chicago. As a freelance researcher on the topic of Freemasonry, visiting the Valley's library, volunteering, or reading the books on the shelves, the librarian, Brother Carl Peterson, casually reveals random artifacts from the archives. One day, this peculiar charter caught our attention. This item was a framed document with the obscure name, the Order of the Builders for Boys. So out of curiosity, deciding to do a little digging to find out more information about this organization, which has a striking resemblance to that of the Order of Demolay. The Masonic youth body formed a few years before the formation of the Builders on March 18, 1919 in Kansas City, Missouri. So here is the backstory of this exciting organization. March 2nd, 1921, the Order of the Builders had come to fruition after 256 members of the Van Rensselaer Lodge of Perfection, now known today as the Valley of Chicago, had decided to put together a committee along with fellow Chicagoan Arthur Maston Millard, joining the Lodge of Perfection on March 28, 1907, of which he would eventually become the thrice potent master. Millard is the master builder in operation. In collaboration with the brethren of the Lodge and coming to a mutual understanding, both parties would form a new Masonic body for young men aged 13 to 21. This particular youth order was open in membership to relatives and friends of the Freemasons. The ritual was drafted throughout several meetings concerning the order's theme and rework. And here's a brief profile and Masonic record of the illustrious Brother Arthur Millard. July 22nd, 1871 through December 8, 1946, a heartfelt obituary at the time of Millard's passing reads, born at Lincoln, England, active for many years in civic affairs in the church as well as fraternal organizations. His eminence had been widely recognized, and a host of friends mourned his demise. After such a successful business career, laterally as Western representative of Rutland Transit Company, a lake steamship line operated by a subsidiary of Rutland Railroad, Brother Millard recognized a call to give full time to the cause of fraternity and human betterment. And some 35 years ago, having served as its president previously, he became manager of the Masonic Employment Bureau, building that organization into an institution known throughout the United States and recognized as a model for numerous other similar bureaus. He also found time to acquire the Republican nomination for mayor of Chicago. Much of his attention was given to the problem of juvenile delinquency and efforts to reclaim boys whose misdemeanors had placed them under the youth homes in Chicago and the juvenile boys courts. He was, presiding judges spoke of his work as most important and notable successes. He was a religious man, and for many years he gave a lot of his time to speak effectively at public gatherings concerning the youth of Chicago. The Masonic record of Arthur Millard, author's Masonic life, a long and active one, started in Lafayette Lodge number 265, F&AM, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He affiliated after his removal to Chicago with Golden Rule Lodge number 726 and retained that membership throughout the balance of his life. On February 21st, 1907, he was made a Grand Elect Mason. Grand Elect Mason 14 in Van Rensselaer Lodge of Perfection. He received the historic degrees in Chicago Council, Princes of Jerusalem. In Gorgas chapter of Roscoe, March 28, 1907, he was made an Inspector General 33, an honorary member of the Supreme Council, Northern Masonic Jurisdiction at Chicago. He served in the elective line as thrice potent master, made Grand Elect Masons. Each received all 11 Lodge of Perfection degrees, and the amount of time, effort devoted by illustrious Brother Millard has seldom been excelled in the Scottish Rite. So this essentially was like a vinyl decal, like a sticker that I found. Brother Gary Behringer, a former Grand Master of this order, he dug out of his closet a lot of items out of an old box, and he gave me this sticker, and I digitized it, scanned it, digitized it, and it looks really nice. So this is exactly the emblem of the Order of the Builders, and I'll explain a little bit about the symbols. So Millard was the first Grand Master of the Order of the Builders, and he describes this insignia in his own words. It represents the shield of protection, upon which is a representation of the Holy Bible open, the lamp of knowledge, the sword of justice, the trowel of labor, and the stars of patriotism. The first president and Grand Master of the Order of the Builders, obviously Arthur Millard, he had a vision for this group, where he wanted to take it. He was very active in the inner city of Chicago, helping the youth, and he really had a vision for this. And so right here, we have a very early example of a charter from the order, and I'll kind of read that. So here we have a charter issued April 11, 1922 from the state of Illinois. We have noticed that the name change of the order happened in subsequent documents, which indicates that the name change occurred the following year after this charter was printed and sealed. So after this charter was printed, they changed the name to Order of the Builders and dropped the For Boys part. The transcription of the charter reads, to the glory of the Grand Architect of the Universe, Central Council, the Order of the Builders for Boys, according to the grace of God, which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, but let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. Greetings. Be at noon until all that we, the executive officers of the Central Council at Chicago in the state of Illinois, United States of America, by virtue of the authority in us vested, do create and hereby constitute the brethren named in this charter and their legal successors, a chapter of the Order of the Builders for Boys to be known as Des Plaines Chapter number 81 in Des Plaines, Illinois. To exercise and enjoy all the rights and privileges of said order according to the Constitution, statutes, and all other laws and regulations that may now or hereafter be ordained and enacted for such chapter by the Central Council, for which this charter shall be our authority to them and their chapter. Upon reading numerous materials provided to me concerning the order, it is clear to me that a distinct philosophy of morality and patriotism was impressed upon the psyches of the candidates. Add in some elements of spirituality contained within the ritual, and you have a great foundation of working tools to build with. Arthur's vision for the order in his own words. In Chicago, 30,000 boys become of age every year. 7,000 of them, or approximately 1/4, get into court trouble every year. While added, thousands escape, and 85% of Chicago's crimes are committed by youths under 21. The country over the lad of 21 or thereabouts forms a very great percentage of the 150,000 prisoners now locked up in penal institutions in the United States. Van Rensselaer Lodge of Perfection is building, in the Order of the Builders for Boys, for the highest and best in posterity. We have been guided by a divine hand into the creation of mighty influence, a potent force which stands now and shall stand in the future for righteousness and for the upbuilding and fulfillment of constructive ideas in the minds of boys in the years when these things leave their indelible impression. May we then, in keeping the faith entrusted to us, build a living monument of duty to God and service to humanity, which shall stand as long as the ages shall endure. As you can see, this man was a visionary for this order, very eloquently put there by Millard. So this was a very hard to scan. It came in like a booklet, a fold booklet, so I had to kind of flatten it out and take a scan, but this is a very cool photo of an initiation of new members of the Order of the Builders. Yeah. And this is the Van Rensselaer Lodge of Perfection, chapter number 1, Order of the Builders. So the degrees of the order. So essentially, there's 2 degrees to this order. The first degree being the apprentice degree, and the second, the builder's degree. And I'll read a little synopsis of the ritual here. These degrees teach valuable Masonic lessons about spirituality, democracy, and the American way of life. A quote from the ritual. We must strive for the establishment within our borders of a stern and lofty standard of personal and public morality, which shall guarantee to each man his rights, and which shall insist in returning upon the full performance by each man of his duties, both to his neighbor and to the great nation whose flag must symbolize in the future, as it has symbolized in the past, the highest hopes of all mankind. Thus spoke a President of the United States and a devoted Master Mason, the late Theodore Roosevelt. Concerning the ritual of the degrees, the ritual and exercises of the order are both symbolic and direct in their teachings of spirituality, love, and obedience to parents, and morality, manhood, and patriotism. Each candidate is given a special builder's Bible on his initiation into the order, and nothing is permitted in the chapter or its teachings that will in any manner of direct or indirect reference arouse the spirit of antagonism or intolerance in the youthful mind toward any race or creed, or to anything other than those forces that are destructive to the American home, community, and patriotic life. Activities of the builders, which was determined by the members of the chapter during regular meetings, may include a variety of activities, but not limited to social events, fundraising, civil service, athletic activities, and sports tournaments. So as you can see here, this is a very interesting newspaper clipping that I scanned from the private collection of Brother Gary Behringer. So this is interesting because I don't know if you can see a very young Grand Chancellor John Loaiza. I don't know if you can spot him there, but he told me when I showed him these newspaper clippings, they were very emotional for him because he gets to see himself as a young child and some of his old friends. And when I talk to former members of this group, there's an emotional connection. This is their first introduction to Freemasonry as a youth order and learning the precepts and the philosophies and ethos that Freemasonry will inculcate later in their life. So whenever they speak of the Order of the Builders, it's always with fond memories, and it's a little emotional for them. So here's some more newspaper clippings. I'll just give you a moment to kind of read it. I don't know if you can see it. And as you can see, in Freemasonry, the wives, the spouses, the significant others, they're very important, the role that they play in Freemasonry. Yes, it's a men's fraternity, but the women are like the backbone of this fraternity. They allow us to come here and be Freemasons, and they're very supportive. And as you can see, they were very crucial into development of the Order of the Builders, standing behind their men, and they knew that this was a good thing to be involved with. So a big shout out to the ladies of Freemasonry. The officer structure of the order. You have the MB, which was the master builder in the east, and then you had a DEP, a deputy master, SI, senior inspector, SEC secretary, treasurer, junior inspector, senior overseer, junior overseer, chaplain. You had a marshal, a sentinel. A chapter of the Order of the Builders contains 16 members headed by a master builder. The chapters work accordingly with an advisory council of master masons. A state body is called a grand chapter with the title of grand given to its officers. The main national body of the order is called the Central Council, with the Supreme Master Builder as the head of the organization. The 8 elected officers of any given chapter are chosen from among the junior members of the order. The 7 appointed members can be either junior members or associate members. The associate members from the Advisory Council of Master Masons elect 5 members to the Executive Council who work with the chapter. Master Masons, along with non-Masonic fathers or male legal guardians of the young men, may visit and attend a meeting of the Order of the Builders after taking a pledge. And this was from another pamphlet about, kind of like in Illinois, we have the On the Threshold. This is something similar, just a little pamphlet about what the Order of the Builders, what it is, what it's about. If people who are desirous of joining, they would hand them a pamphlet like this in the 30s. So we do not know why the Forbois part of the name was retracted in the title of the Order of the Builders. Also, at this present time, we do not know how active this order is today or lack thereof. No such chapters exist in the state of Illinois. However, the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Kentucky website mentions the Order of the Builders in the present tense. It could be that the website for the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Kentucky needs to be updated, and this order is now defunct. I don't know. I tried to email them. I didn't get a response back. But I do believe there might be a few chapters in the United States left. But as far as Illinois, it's done. In closing, upon receiving the actual ritual as it was practiced a century ago in Illinois, promises made to the lender of said materials that we shall not publish the actual complete ritual for publication. However, the closing of a builder's chapter does contain this exciting piece of ritual, a piece to be of cultural significance to the ethos of the Order of the Builders. With that in mind, here's a short excerpt from the closing ceremony of the ritual, with the hopes that it will give the reader somewhat of a better understanding into the philosophy of building a boy upward to eventually becoming acclimated to manhood and ready to be of service to one's country and family. So here's a little bit of the closing ceremony. MB, what is the purpose of our order, Deputy? To teach us to build upon the training of youth, that each may be better fitted for the duties of manhood and the responsibilities of citizenship. MB, 1 rep. Deputy takes a seat. Brother SI, what is your duty? SI, rising and saluting. To counsel and guide my brethren in the fulfillment of their services as builders. MB, how may we build? SI, by avoiding that which is wrong, holding to that which is good, keeping our lips and minds of words of uncleanliness and thoughts of evil, our bodies clean and our hearts upright. Takes a seat. MB, 1 rap. JI rises and salutes. Brother JI, what is your duty? To aid my brethren in the performance of their tasks. MB, what are the first lessons of our order? Love and obedience to parents, belief in God, knowledge of his law, and fulfillment of his statutes. Devotion to country and respect for all in authority. There are the first and necessary foundation stones to build righteous manhood and good citizenship. Seated. Some acknowledgments here. I would like to personally extend my regards to Brothers Carl Peterson and Gary Behringer. Brother Carl's the librarian here at the Valley, and Brother Gary joined the Order of the Builders in 1953. He became a master builder in 58, and eventually he would become the Grand Master of the Builders in the state of Illinois in 1964. We thank the 2 gentlemen for assisting and providing documents needed to put this piece together. We believe that the lessons contained within the order are relevant in today's society. It is sad to know that such a beautiful set of degrees existed here in Illinois, yet not much information is available about the order. We believe that without the assistance of the brethren, as mentioned above, this article would not be completed as intended. So my conclusion here. In closing, since its inception, the Scottish Rite has had a very complex journey with hardships and some controversy. Since the beginning of the Rite, ultimately the Scottish Rite prevailed over the many obstacles it faced. The resilience and persistence of Morin and Franken to expand their passion for high-grade masonry in the New World resonated with the curious seekers of the post-Enlightenment era. The Order of the Royal Secret attracted a sophisticated demographic of gentlemen who traveled long distances and paid large sums to be dubbed a sublime prince of the order. These early rituals were not as elaborate as they are now. Nevertheless, these rituals were painstakingly translated and transcribed by hand. This great work benefited future generations of Freemasons to cherish and pass on the tradition. It takes a true visionary to rise to the occasion and decide to further this organization, despite the bureaucratic red tape involved with following Masonic protocol. Although authority figures would correct these errors over time, the effort alone is remarkable. As Masonic researchers, we are very grateful to have these early documents of the order preserved. The Scottish Rite Valley of Chicago has a rich history and contains the spirit of being a Scottish Rite Freemason. The intellectual discourse among the brethren can echo in the dining hall. The passion for the liberal arts and sciences can be witnessed by its members at every reunion. The library and museum of the Valley of Chicago contains numerous books and antiques to nurture our minds and inspire us to learn about this rich history. Many of these items were donated to the Valley by its members, past and present, desirous of fostering the spirit of the Scottish Rite for the sake of posterity. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.